The International Alliance for the Prevention of AIDS HIV Prevention Education Program, Module 5, Progression of HIV. The following graph represents the progression of HIV in the body of someone who hasn't been tested and isn't getting treatment. The red line represents the viral load, which is the amount of virus in the blood at any time, while the blue line represents the CD4 count. Remember, those CD4 cells are essential to the body's ability to fight off infection. Along the bottom of the graph, we can watch as HIV progresses in the body of someone who has not been tested and is not receiving treatment. On average, it takes about 10 years for HIV to progress to the AIDS stage. As HIV progresses, it goes through 4 distinct stages. You can think of the progression as a story that unfolds over the course of 10 years and goes through 4 distinct chapters. Chapter 1, primary infection. Chapter 2, the quiet period. Chapter 3, early HIV disease. And Chapter 4, AIDS. So let's think about those 10 years. Let's think about where we want to be, what's important to us. I think about my daughter. She's 11 now, so in 10 years she'll be working hard to graduate college and start her career. I'm going to have to work extremely hard to make sure that she has that opportunity to thrive. Now let's see how well these two stories intertwine. Chapter 1 begins with primary infection. HIV is first introduced into the body and begins to multiply. The body's defenses are overwhelmed at first. There may be flu-like symptoms, but there's no way to tell that it's HIV. It can often take several weeks for the body to learn to fight back against HIV. Because many tests rely on testing for antibodies that fight HIV, there's a small window of time during the primary infection chapter when a test may not be reliable. That's why it's always important to get a second follow-up test 3 months later to make sure that the primary infection stage is over. Next, we move on to Chapter 2, the quiet period. During this time, my body and HIV are constantly fighting back and forth, with no winner. Billions of immune cells are destroyed, and for about 6 or 7 years, my body is able to replace them. There are no signs or symptoms of HIV infection. The only way for me to know my status is for me to get tested. When my body is no longer able to replace the lost immune cells, I enter the 3rd chapter, early HIV disease. This is where my stories begin to conflict. My immune system begins to fail and opportunistic infections begin to make me sick, but sometimes everyone gets sick, right? I've just been stressed or it's seasonal. But the only way for me to know my status is to get tested. Now, unless I get tested, there's no way to know my status. So as time goes on, the story I thought I was writing is starting to change. I get more sick more often. It affects my ability to work, to focus on the things that are important to me. AIDS is the 4th chapter in this story, when the CD4 cell count drops below 200 per microliter, and opportunistic infections have taken hold. HIV progresses to AIDS. The devastated immune system combined with opportunistic infections leads to severe symptoms and can lead to death within 10 years of primary infection. AIDS can end this story in a death, but it leaves all the other stories unresolved. It doesn't have to, though. While AIDS is the 4th chapter, it doesn't have to be the last chapter. At any point during the story, if I get tested, get treatment, I can be free to write my own ending. Getting on treatment helps to stop HIV's progression. People can stay in or get back to the quiet period and extend the quiet period. So instead of a story that ends after just 10 years, people are instead able to keep that story going for 20 years, 30, 40, 50 years. Today, everyone living with HIV can live long and healthy lives, but they need to get on and stay on treatment. So let's recap. During each stage of infection, what is happening between HIV and the immune system? What are the symptoms? What is the duration? Why should we get a second HIV test 3 months after the first? What is needed to live a long and healthy life with HIV? We have now completed Module 5, Progression of HIV. We're ready to move on to Module 6, Testing and Treatment.